thanks everyone for joining us today. I've got, those of you that don't know me, I'm Clint Carlos, one of the co-founders of Soar. We are a destination for human development. And today we're talking about kind of the next generation of audio learning. And obviously this is a place that we're heavily invested in and doing some innovation. And we've asked Eric Denna to be our featured guest today. We're going to do a Q&A session. This will last just under 30 minutes. And so first of all, thank you for joining, Eric. It's an honor to have you. I was doing my homework and looking through your LinkedIn profile last night, and I got to say I had to keep clicking show more because there's so many things in your experience. I've never had to push show more as many times as I did on your LinkedIn profile. One of the longest I've seen and most impressive. You've been active in learning tech, on boards as an advisor. You've been CIO of major universities, Brigham Young University, University of Utah, the Church of Jesus Christ. Now you're at Health Catalyst. So what led you to your interest in technology and in learning? And you want to share a little bit more about your background for those that are joining us today?
Sure. The only reason that the LinkedIn profile is so long is I'm unstable and old.
I don't know about that.
My wife accuses me of having adult onset ADD, and I just keep wandering to new opportunities. So it's a little bit more background. I got involved in tech when I was a student at Brigham Young University. I was studying accounting, and we had to take a class in Apple Basic during that time. This was back with the Apple II, when the Apple IIe came out. And I got hooked, and I've been involved in it ever since, and had a lot of fun. It was particularly fun at universities to see cutting edge learning going on and being involved in that on the research side. So a lot of fun.
That's awesome. So you've kind of seen the adoption of new technology and the waves of technology that have come through. You've seen, really the internet become mainstream. You've seen mobile technology, online learning platforms, streaming. What do you think, has been the most significant wave of change that you've seen in the learning tech space?
Well, something that we've always pursued with learning. I'm a big fan of competency-based learning, where you're really clear about what is it that you're trying, what is it you're trying to achieve in terms of a learning objective, and assessing where someone's at beforehand, and then shaping the learning experience to where they're at, versus just kind of cramming everyone through the same learning experience. And so I've been involved with a lot of different companies that have been kind of on that mantra for years to get us toward a more personalized experience, rather than just kind of building a big machine and forcing everyone through the same learning experiences. So that's been driving me for a long time, and that's something that we're working on a lot at Health Catalyst as well. So
that's great. So obviously, the kind of elephant in the room that we're all dealing with and thinking about right now, this COVID-19 situation. We're all kind of isolated. What role does technology play in helping people press onward through these kind of challenging times?
Well, I think just helping people stay emotionally stable and feel uplifted in some way. We get a lot of our strength from being with one another. I saw a really interesting video that my kids passed around 2 days ago. It was produced by John, I think it's John Kaczynski, if I remember right, from The Office.
Yeah.
And it's Some Good News Network. And it was produced out of his home. And just really wonderful snippets of, here's some good news in the midst of all this COVID, troubling COVID kinds of stuff. Being associated with healthcare in my regular work life, it's really getting challenging. And here in the United States, we're probably just at the edge of when it's going to get really bad. And so it's just delightful to see someone who just focused on goodness and sharing that light with others in hopes of lifting spirits and encouraging and just keeping people positive.
Right. We can all use that right now. Right now.
Absolutely.
You see so much negativity, and it's like you turn on the TV, all you see is maps full of red dots,
Yeah.
and it gets intimidating, and we see the interruptions in our daily life. That uplifting and kind of edifying aspect of content and learning, I think, is often undervalued, right? And you're someone who has achieved a lot, and the thing that strikes me is, despite that, and despite you reference your age and all that, but you continue to have this passion for learning. It's like maybe your wife calls it ADD, but it's like this curiosity that drives you forward, right? How important is it for people to feed that curiosity, to feed their mind and soul with uplifting, edifying content through challenging times and just throughout their life as they develop and grow and try to pursue their goals?
I think it's endemic to who we are as human beings, that if we're not growing, we're not filling the measure of our creation. So I'm a child of the 60s. There's a philosopher in the 60s named Eric Hoffer, and sometimes I've used a quote of his on my email signature. He says, "In times of radical change, it is the learner who inherits the future, while the learned find themselves beautifully equipped to work in a world that no longer exists." I'm more interested in learners and learning than feeling like I'm learned or someone else. Part of one downside aspect of being in higher education times is you run into some professors who think that they know it all, that they're learned, and they stopped learning. And it's just aggravating to see people in that mode when they're in a learning institution. Mm-hmm. So I used to think of universities, I still think of universities as communities of learners, and all that differentiates you is how far you are in that learning journey. But if you step off that path, you're not helpful in a learning community. So I enjoy learning.
That's awesome. I think in today's day and age, I look at my daughter, she's a teenager. I've got, friends that are younger and people that work for me. And, I always kind of appreciate the feel of a hard cover book, right? And flipping pages, and even the smell. I kind of, I get excited when I get one package from Amazon in the mail. But this future generation, I mean, they don't read the way that I grew up reading, and probably you've read your whole life. But what interests me is that they're still avid learners. They have the same curiosity, right? But you see the boom of Audible, right, and audiobooks and podcasts and different sources of information, and how much has that accelerated or made learning accessible in your life or in your life?
Well, I think it's a great ability to knowledge has always been a challenge. Whether that was remote collections of big libraries where you had to travel some distance. I remember the first time I went to a library as a child. I mean, we had to go all the way into town. I lived out in the country, and it was a big deal when you got to go to the library and pick up books. And my mom really encouraged me to read, and I was a late bloomer to reading, but it was always fun to go to that center of knowledge and just see all this collection. But it was difficult to access. And I think one of the greatest breakthroughs with technology is opening up the accessibility to knowledge. In fact, the first time I met Paul was when he was tackling that very thing of digitizing content to make it accessible. And I think what you're doing with Soar is just another dimension of accessibility to knowledge. In using something that is very natural for us. It's our voice. It's endemic to who we are. Keyboards have always been painful. I had to learn to type older in life, and I've always wanted. I remember Steve Jobs produced a video years and years ago. I used to use as a professor. It was called Knowledge Navigator, and it was a hypothetical scene of a professor preparing a lecture, and he never touched a keyboard. It was all voice actuated. And I just always thought, man, when that arrives, when we can just talk. And there was some visual interactions as well, but the sooner we get away from this keyboard thing, the better for me.
Well, I love that. My wrists sometimes get sore from all the typing I do.
Yeah.
And and I think back to the sci-fi movies, the futuristic portrayals of the future that I've watched growing up. You always hear or see someone talking to a computer, whether it's Iron Man talking to Jarvis, or you've got Star Trek commanding a ship through voice. They're not harnessed to this tiny screen and straining their eyes and typing stuff. So voice-based learning is really a much more natural human experience when it comes to computing, right? And the thing that the other thing about traditional computing, traditional learning platforms, even if it's on a mobile device or a laptop, opening that screen is a little bit like opening Pandora's box, because you don't know if you're about to get bombarded with notifications and distracting content, addicting content. And in many ways, we're kind of enslaved to that technology, right? They train us what to do next. And so they manipulate our habits and our patterns. So the thing that I think about as I think about what we're building on voice platform and what is coming with this wave of voice computing is humans are kind of emancipating ourselves from being enslaved to screens, and we're now in charge of our learning experience. The other thing about voice computing, and I'd love your thoughts on this, Eric, but it feels to me much more like a curiosity-based learning platform. When we're kids, how do we learn? We just ask questions. We look around, we're curious, we just ask questions, Exactly. And then at some point, people tell us, hey, you have to sit in seats, be quiet, and just watch a teacher, talk and instruct and lecture for hours on end, and then you're going to learn what we want you to learn. But curiosity-based learning is where humans thrive and naturally flourish. So the ability to ask a question and get an answer is really, I think, kind of rebirthing natural human learning.
Absolutely. I think the more we honor questions, the more we foster learning. I always used to look at my success as a professor. I'd measure it by the quality of the questions that they were asking. Not that I was asking them, but that they were asking me. And when class time, when a student asked a really terrific question, those were the classes that we all remembered, because to me, it's the portal into the mind. But it's also the mechanism by which you trigger learning and enhance learning. It's by honoring questions and helping people learn how to ask great questions, sharing questions with each other. Look at the questions I'm asking right now. I used to do this as a professor. I get with colleagues as much to learn about the questions that they were asking as to the answers, because those were the doors that opened up windows of knowledge. So I think the more we can honor questions and help people ask terrific questions, the more edifying it is for us personally, but for humanity as a whole as well.
Right. So, I read some research that said, 50 years ago, the human knowledge base would double every 100 years. And then it started to accelerate. It would double every 25 years. Now IBM is saying the human knowledge is doubling every 12 hours.
Yeah.
So, to your point earlier, technology has made content and knowledge accessible, infinitely accessible. I mean, we've got an overwhelming amount of content and knowledge. So in this world of constantly bombarded with content and access to knowledge, what are the barriers or challenges that are preventing people from finding what's most impactful or uplifting in their lives?
Well, that's a great question. I guess part of my answer would be going back to something you already said, that I think something that we've got to get past is the manipulation that's often occurring within the tech industry. We know that there's huge leveraging of psychological tricks to keep us glued to a screen, or to distract us from something that might be good to something that's really not helpful at all. At times it feels like we're in this endless game of trivia pursuit, just consuming all kinds of of junk food for the mind, versus really using the. I think we need to step back away from kind of the press of the commercialized side of society, and go back to what's really innate for us. It's back to the learning side of this, and what enriches and uplifts and edifies, and not just entertains. The root of the word entertainment has an interesting etymology. It's really distract is that root of entertain versus edify. I think we need to do more edification than we do entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting. So in a world of infinite possibilities, I believe that a big part of how you find that edifying content is curation, right? And so, you get thought leaders, you get people out there that you trust, trusted voices, people you can relate to. That often is how we curate or self-curate content. What is the role of artificial intelligence in the future of content curation? Can that help? Can it be manipulated? Like, what's the balance?
That's a great question. I actually started my career, my first job after my PhD program was working in an AI lab in New York City. And for a very ennobling purpose. We were scanning daily trade data off Wall Street to look for insider trading. I'm joking about it.
Yeah.
So for me, one of the great applications, potential applications that I don't think we've fully realized yet, and what I hope Soar can help with, is I'll go back to the example I gave in my first job. One of the reasons we were using AI in the search of daily trade data is it was just too overwhelming to try to do it as a human being. So we were teaching the machine how to look for what we were looking for. And so to me, that's always been a fundamental purpose of machine learning or AI, is telling it, I want something like this, and letting the machine do what it does really well, of sifting through lots of junk to get to what I'm really looking for. And we've always, whenever we've dealt with AI, of sifting through it to find the real pearls. So I would expect that to be a really valuable use of AI in this space of curation.
Well, that's great. We've got a few folks on the line here. Eric, I wanted to open it up for anyone who might have a question for you, or just about AI-based learning or audio learning. Anyone have a question you want to pose?
Great.
Feel free to unmute yourself and introduce yourself if you'd like to ask a question. I think we've got a shy group today, Eric. No problem. So feel free to chime in if you do think of a question. We've got just a few more minutes here before we wrap up. Eric, you've seen Soar's voice-based learning platform, right? It runs on Amazon Alexa. There's a companion mobile experience. It makes searching content and discovering through curiosity really easy. Obviously, we're at the beginning of this journey as kind of a startup company, and we're going up against the big boys. What advice do you have for someone like Soar that really has a mission for edifying and uplifting, humans through technology and learning? How do we find our place in this niche, and where do we ground ourselves as we kind of set our identity?
Well, I think it starts with what you're already doing, of looking for what are the jobs to be done by this. So I'm a big fan of Clay Christensen and Alex Osterwalder, the Strategizer group, where innovation really starts with who is it that you're serving and what are they trying to do. So I think staying focused on this notion of facilitating learning, edification and learning, edification of humanity, that job to be done, just staying fixated on that and looking for all the different ways that can be done. That's why I got involved. I've been a big fan of Paul's for, how long has it been now? 30 years now. And so the passion around, keeping the passion around this ability to uplift and help people learn and making knowledge accessible, I just encourage you to stay focused on that.
Great, thanks, Eric. That means a lot, you know. And you mentioned Paul a few times. For those that don't know, Paul's my co-founder at Soar. He was the founder and CEO of Ancestry, and he does really have a passion around uplifting humanity and helping everyone fulfill, you know, the measure of their contribution. We got a question from Dave here. He says, "Who was the philosopher who spoke about learning versus being learned?"
Oh,
learned.
His name was learned. His name is Eric Hoffer, and I can't remember the name of the book. If you Googled Eric Hoffer learners or something like that, I'm sure you would get it. But that's where I got the quote.
Great. Eric, you know, one of the things that while we're on the topic of kind of Paul's mission and that, you know, one of the things that he has this passion to kind of preserve history, right, and preserve value, and obviously the ancestry thing is a big lot to do with that. But one of the things that he's observed is, you know, there's these tremendous thought leaders and experts that during their time become well known, and their philosophies and their systems and their discoveries are championed, and then within a handful of years after their death, they're almost totally forgotten, right? Aside from their family or their close followers. And so part of in this world of, you know, trillions or quadrillions of pieces of content and knowledge out there, you know, keeping their kind of legacy front and center and making that content accessible, the most important content, is a big part of our mission. Who are one or two? You mentioned Clayton Christensen and Alex Oswalder. Do you have anyone else that comes to mind that you think, gosh, we really ought to preserve their knowledge and their legacy as we move into the future, because future generations may forget or not know it, but they need their contribution?
Oh man, that's a long list. I'll tell you. I'll give you one that interestingly comes to mind. He's had a huge influence on me, but I think his time is still in the making in terms of the impact of his scholarship and thinking. He was my PhD advisor. He stoked the fire of me tilting at windmills. So when I got my PhD, I found him in a business school at Michigan State University. And what he was doing was showing that traditional structures of business systems, particularly accounting systems, were archaic in the face of database technology. So this is back in the early days of SQL. In fact, it was in the days of SQL versus QBE, the IBM fight that was between, what was it, Zloof and I can't remember the other guy, but Bill McCarthy is who I'm talking of. He started looking at data in a really interesting way, where he differentiated views on data from the source of the data and posed this structure, this architecture of what he called business events. That if you accurately captured the business event, semantically accurate, that you could produce any number of views, versus a view-driven system like accounting, where you're going to produce this one artifact and then you constrain the representation of the event down to, in accounting, it's data count and amount.
Right.
So Bill turned that whole thing on its ear, and is still relevant. He's in his 70s and he's still an active researcher and pushing, and it's guys like that to me are really exciting scholars that are willing to tilt at windmills and push against. I think we've lost way too much of the reason that tenure was ever created, and that was to protect scholars against the norm and the traditionally accepted, to allow them to be curious and ask provocative questions and challenge the norm, versus just reverence it and worship it and whatever. So I don't know. That's one example. He's not really well known, but I think over time his scholarship is going to prove to be.
Well, that's great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Eric. It means a lot. I think we all captured some really insightful nuggets from your insight and open sharing. We really appreciate you, and I'll make sure that this recording is available for anyone who'd like to access it. Just shoot me an email, clint@soar.com. And Eric, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you. Have a good one.
My pleasure. Thanks. See ya.